Good evening, and welcome to the garden. Welcome to Garden Conversations with Rose. I'm super excited because today, being June 22nd, I am just 3 days away from the start of my vacation. And I know I'll get some time to get into an even more peaceful place, simply just relax from all the hustle and the bustle of school life. I won't have to be out so many times wearing that mask that I hate so much, having to think of social distancing, and I'll just be able to stay indoors or limit my activity outside. And as much as I love my job and I love my children, I am glad to be away from all of them during the summertime. So I'm very excited about that. But on the other hand, I am feeling a little pain in here because just a few days ago, our nation was once again rocked by the untimely death of a woman allegedly at the hand of a partner. And that is all about domestic abuse and domestic violence. And those of you who know from my earlier posts know that I am always triggered by incidents such as this one. I have spoken extensively about domestic abuse and domestic violence because, as I would have indicated earlier, I myself grew up in a home where I saw it, and I know it's a very traumatic experience. And foremost, it is exceptionally difficult in many regards for the victims to withdraw themselves from such a situation. I saw it firsthand with my mom. And so I will not want to lay any blame. And now, while I'm not yet speaking specifically about that instance I spoke about, I just want to speak broadly about domestic abuse and how we react as a society to all of that. So, first and foremost, I will state confidently and bravely and boldly that domestic abuse, domestic violence is categorically wrong. There is simply no excuse for it. It doesn't matter what has been done. Every human being deserves the right of human dignity and ought not to go down in such a manner. And when I think about persons who had been in intimate relationships, bodies blending, spirits perhaps blending as well, and then the life of one of that person is taken away, it is something else for me. It is painful and grating. So once again, I will say that it is categorically wrong. The second thing I need to say is that we ought not to be blaming the victim. Many persons out there are speaking as if they are experts on the matter, and while it may be true that perhaps victims should not be in the situation and even remain there, one never knows how difficult it is to pull away. I am saying again, I know firsthand because I lived in my home, and I know that my mom did not wish to have that situation, but it was not always easy for her to withdraw. Of course, she did withdraw herself, and I'm very thankful for that. Because on many occasions I saw where she could have been killed, as well as myself, some of my siblings, and even some of my nieces and nephews. It didn't happen, and thankfully I'm grateful to God for that. So we ought not to be blaming the victim. We must do our research and find out why it is that the victim simply cannot get out. There are so many reasons, and again, I'm not making excuses, but as I always tend to say to my colleagues and my friends, that one can always see a wound on the outside. You can see something bleeding, a bruise, but you never ever see what's happening in there. You don't know what's going on. You don't know how difficult it may be, and all the factors that are including and impinging on the situation that perhaps doesn't make it so easy. So we ought not to take the blame route. And while it is that we ought not to take the blame route, I wish to also state that there is always a telltale sign. There are always red flags that we ought to look for when we are in relationships. And as much as we can, for those of us who may be engaged in domestic abuse situations, we ought to be looking out for those red flags. And those of us who have friends out there or even know of individuals who may be in abusive relationships, you must be there as a source of support for your friend. You have to be there for that person. Find kind ways of pointing out those telltale signs and get the help if you can, and as much as you can. And even those of you who may be in it, try to get the help that you can. And of course, I will also state that there must be a balance. I've always said that I believe in balance. So while it is true that we ought to look out for the victims, the perpetrator himself or herself need not be left out of the picture. Because if we look after all of the victims and do nothing about the perpetrators, it will not serve the purpose it ought to serve. The perpetrators themselves need to be looked at. Balance is always important. And certainly, of course, foremost, we ought to look at having conversations. There are so many conversations that must be had about interactions, relationships, emotional intelligence, conflict resolution, anger issues, speaking out, holding back, doing right, playing the right cards, speaking one's mind, being assertive but not aggressive. Many conversations must be had, and I dare say they ought to begin at a very early age with our youth. Because many instances, when the victims and the perpetrators end up in such a manner as the case that was done earlier, it isn't a one-time affair. It more often than not, it's a build-up of a lot of luggage, a lot of baggage, a lot of unresolved matters that have not been brought to the fore. So all of us out there, we ought to do some introspection at this time. Look into yourself, do some soul searching, find out about your self-control, how you are able to resolve conflicts, how much you fly off the handle, deal with your issues, and get the help that you can. Domestic abuse is unacceptable. We should not lay blame on anyone. We must always look for the telltale signs. We need to find a balance and help both victim and perpetrator. And we must have some conversations. Have a beautiful, lovely, restful Tuesday evening. And thank you for joining me in the garden.